So, how would you define yourself as a leader?
I love this question. It feels like it's a philosophy question because you almost, every day, but I would say as a leader, I'm a long time learner, and I see myself, my type of leadership is as servitude leader. So I'm always trying to help others grow. And particularly in my organization, it's all about, well, how do we build the behind us succession? So that's always in the back of my mind. And when you apply that, then you're always constantly trying to learn. I always find and challenge yourself. So I think that's how I would define is the ever learning leader that is truly about growth and growing those behind me. And that's where I get most of my satisfaction is
Mhm.
trying to grow teams.
Now, in terms of your success, do you feel that you planned it? Did you follow a written plan? What did it look like?
There is no plan for my crazy little journey. And something for me, I think, along the way that was really helpful. I mean, I work in financial tech, and that's not a natural path for somebody who was an art student and almost went into fine art. Like that's,
Mhm.
very different side of my brain. But in life, you sort of end up in circumstances where you're doing something that you kind of in your mind think, it's not me. But at the time I needed to eat, I needed to pay bills. So I'm in this job. But somebody had said, you've got skills here. And, have you ever explored it? And so sometimes putting aside our preconceived notions about who we are and what we are and opening ourselves up to things that we hadn't tried can open up doors you never knew. So part of it, I think, for me in leading was also about myself. Like, what was I open to doing? And I discovered I was really good at training people, and that's kind of where my path started, was in training and development, which led to more leadership, which led to executive leadership, and all these types of things, and a passion. But practicing it, not just teaching it, is really, really where you get the value. And when you can see the outcome of that, that's when you realize, okay, I'm doing the right thing. So it's been a bit of a value equation for me, not something I said I wanted to be in this role. As I've challenged myself along the journey and been open to different experiences, they've all added to this whole piece. And you don't define yourself by a job, and then I think it just lends itself to opening up different paths.
Mhm. No, and I think that's a great reminder for people because people get fixated sometimes on just, here's my job.
Yeah, I mean, I'm Generation X, so I was the first generation to be told you're not going to have the company watch. And they were right. I've had about 5 different careers already, very different. And that's not a bad thing if you're open. But if you have self limiting beliefs about what you can do, it's going to be a very narrow and limiting experience. So, we don't have to define who we are by how we make money. It can be all about what we've learned and how we contribute, which can be in non-monetary ways as well. I think that's the other part. A lot of my volunteer work that I've also done has greatly contributed to my leadership, even if it's not a paid role. I think it's contributed to my development and my contributions in just as strong ways.
Mhm. Well, that's a great perspective. What would you say is your strongest attribute or skill as a leader?
I always love these questions. It's like trying to brag about yourself, right? But I think for me, I'd say I have really good communication skills and relationship and combining them together. So I sort of weigh off both. It's actually been my background. I studied language, I did theater. So the communication side is very natural to me. And when you put that into leadership context, you realize that a lot of what we're just trying to do is share ideas and get people aligned. And a lot of that comes down to clear, effective communication and empathy. So if you don't have a real true sense of care for the individual, it's hard to lead them. They're going to pick up on it. And then you become the manager versus the leader. Anybody can manage. It's a role, and it's prescribed. But people follow and choose to follow leaders. So you don't even have to have the title, but people will follow you if you have that contribution.
Mhm. Now, was there ever a challenge or an obstacle or even an opportunity that you feel was an important part of shaping you as a leader in your career?
There have been many. It's hard to pick just one, but I think if I were I'm going to pick something to me that really has stood out in more recent times. So I think a lot of what I described about being open and with people are foundations and from the very beginning. But as you move up into leadership, you have to build a lot of resilience. And that comes from as soon as you're into the leader role, you're now also subject to a lot of criticism, a lot of being on a spotlight, a lot of places that aren't as comfortable that you have to navigate. And I think one of the biggest challenges I ever had was having the judiciary as a client, and especially when they were going to sue your parent company. So in that example, on paper, you look at, oh my gosh, this sounds like horrible. It ended up being one of the most incredible work relationships I honed because it was about trust. And that's what I learned is that at the highest level of leadership, we can't get anything done without trust. And so you need to be trustworthy as a leader for people to be able to trust you. Without that, it doesn't matter what your accomplishments are. It doesn't matter what you have on paper. People who rely on you or rely on you to deliver whatever it is you promised. And if you can't, to be honest about that. And I know this sounds really, really basic, but the reality is somehow in leadership and with all sorts of things, they get clouded by a whole bunch of other things that get in the way. And if we lack confidence in ourselves, we might miss that reality. So working with that group, I mean, nobody gets more truthful than the judiciary. But really what they taught me a lot was to really be very transparent and that there's respect in that. They were never going to tell you anything really easy and sugarcoat it, but that was great because you knew exactly. And we had that trust and vulnerability back and forth. So you don't have to be a judge. It's down to everybody. But that at the simplest to the most complicated, I think that's the thread about leadership. It really is about trust.
Now, what motivates you as a leader?
For me, it's really watching other leaders become and embrace leadership when you see it. So it can be really simple. I love to mentor folks. So I do this whether it's in the workplace or out in the community. But when you know someone has had a desire to move somewhere, maybe had a belief about themselves that they couldn't, and they overcame it, and you see them excelling, that to me is probably the most exciting thing because there's I forget who said it, but there's a quote that is, you're not really a true leader until you develop a leader who develops a leader. And I thought, wow, because that is seeing it really not just pass it to somebody else, but then they're passing it down. Now you see the fruits of your efforts in that sort of evolutionary way. And to me, that's really satisfying. That's what gets me out of bed. And it helps me in those times of change when everything I knew over here is starting to go, which in our world is happening very quickly. The essence of people growth is never changes. People always strive to do their best. And if you can get them there, then you can overcome all the other things because you've got the toolkit to take on change.
So then with that, I would say, what would be your advice to the next generation of leaders?
I really love this question because I think leadership is changing so much for the better compared to when I got started. I know that there was so much changing in the 80s and 90s, especially for women. There was a lot of doors open, but there were still a lot of doors that were closed. A lot has changed, but a lot still hasn't. We have new dynamics. There's just so much available for us to learn. And keep that learning mindset. It's never going to change. So be open and understand that what you know today may change, and that's okay as long as you're doing the key things, which is be invested in people. Leadership is a people job, and we can abstract that a lot with I take care of this project or manage X, but underneath it, it's a people job. So invest in yourself, invest in your learning, invest in your relationship skills, invest in people. The rest of it sorts itself out. And network, because really a lot of times when people are growing into leadership, it feels competitive. Like they can feel like, your best way to learn is to embrace others, your peers, people around you, and just get out there and get to know people. They'll get to know you and they'll connect you. Hey, I know, Sarah, for example, is really interested in this. And I was just talking to someone, I should connect them together. We love doing those things. So don't be afraid of what you don't know. embrace learning and get out there and network. And then your leadership will start to move you forward because you'll be doing all the right things. At least that's been my experience. And so far, so good. But
yeah, well, that's a great perspective, different way of looking at it. Now, what would be the one thing in your career that makes you the most proud?
That's a big question from a career perspective. I believe I'm going to say it was a really challenging time in my career. I was with one of the large banks, and my son was not quite 18 months old. And then my father was terminally ill with emphysema. And it was one of those difficult career decisions I had to make because I was on a trajectory in that organization that was very intense. But my family needed me. And when I pitched what for balance at the time, they were not in a place to offer it, and it wasn't encouraged. So I made a career change and I left and went to public sector. It was a very difficult path, but I had to weigh my realities of that moment and where I needed my life to be, which I didn't need to focus as much on my career then. I had to go back for what was important. And it was the best decision I made, both not just for my family, which I was really pleased to spend that time that I had, but my career grew in ways I never would have imagined because I did different things and I tried something new. And I broke what was in my mind was that, oh, I'm going to have to start over. I didn't. I got to leapfrog into a new place. So those risks that we take that are difficult decisions, when they're made for the right reasons, they will always pay off. So I was proud that I had the courage of conviction, which is something that it's really hard sometimes. And a lot of people say, you're crazy. Why would you leave? It was right for me. And if I look back, I wouldn't have made a different decision. In fact, I might have done it sooner. You never know. Yeah. But those are going to be the tough ones that are not as easy to quantify on paper, but they're very personal.
Now, how do you motivate your teams? And do you feel it's changed during this, fantastic pandemic that we're in?
Oh, love this question. This is the leader challenge. It really is. So at Elite Data, where we are, we're very team focused, very much about motivation at a day-to-day level. So we have a weekly online meeting. We call our team the CAT, which stands for kick-ass team. But anyways, we have CAT chat on Thursdays. But we try to use our time not just about updates. Like we're in this new era. You don't get to bump into each other in the hall. You don't get to have the side conversations. So we have to infuse the non-productive to make ourselves productive. It sounds really counterintuitive. So we've done some interesting things where we've created some space for example, a Facebook group just where you can put your jokes called The Kitchen. So the things we would do in our kitchen, share the weekend stories, the things that we normally would have done when you're in there. We've created, we're doing things like weekly gathering pictures for folks, doing sharing our summer vacation, for example, that would have happened. We're doing fun things. So we're going to do weekly games, tournaments, competitions. There's a book club that's running at lunchtime. So we're trying to do some of those things, but also encourage our staff. Now we're very fortunate right now in Atlantic. We're slightly open, so we're trying to support the local restaurants that have taken a really hard time. So we're encouraging people to go for lunch together and giving them a small budget to help support as we go. So try to find ways to connect. And I think underneath the key of motivation is it's all about connection. It doesn't matter how. We've challenged this a lot to say, well, it's not just, you just got to think harder about how to make it work. And challenge ourselves a little bit. Our team's been hybrid remote for a while, but it really has made us think even more so about, well, what works and how do we get people from also, even on the practical side, we've brought in an ergonomic specialist for folks at home. We're recognizing that they're starting to the aches and pains are coming in. So how do we take care of their health and safety in addition to the motivation? So there's a lot that we can do to keep them and just checking in. This is the simplest thing you can do as a leader. Call your people. Just have a conversation. How's it going? Just bring them out for coffee if you can. Just simple. I don't think we have all the answers, but certainly we've had to, I think more so than ever, challenge ourselves to not just get the productivity. We're getting our productivity, But our fear is, are we going to burn people out if we're not taking time to get them to make that space? So still lots to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, if you were to go back 10 years in your career, any specific attribute that you've really changed compared to how you lead today?
Yes, I would say, and I've done one of the most helpful things, and I encourage leaders to do is things like things like uh, personality index and kind of that self-awareness training really, really helps. And I've done Myers-Briggs for a long time. So I know a lot about introversion and extroversion. And I think you can tell I'm naturally an extrovert, lots of energy. And I would say that learning to embrace my introversion side for me and slow down has been incredibly important. And most leaders, even if if they prefer introversion, tend to work very, very quickly to get outcomes. And we can run so fast that we miss a lot. And in slowing down, you actually become more productive. Uh, Even in this role, I'm new in the CEO role, and I'm learning this again. It's like every time you level up, you need to revisit all of these lessons because the world has changed again. And what I'm finding is the same thing. I need to slow down because I've got all these aspirations, especially when you start something new, you're really fired up. Without that, and without checking and whether it's that side, the other side is, as I mentioned, I tend to be more of a go with the flow. So I have to add more structure. So to me, I think the biggest thing you can learn is learn who you are and learn and be very truthful about your strengths and where your blind spots are. Now, I don't try to fix all my blind spots. I find people who are really good at it to help me. And that's the other thing. You can't be all things to everybody. So you have to take those times. And I'm a much more thoughtful, less I'd say I'm less off the cuff than I used to be. Not that I can't be in that moment, it's a strength, but you realize that you overuse things, it can become detrimental. So you again, whenever I feel like maybe my head's getting too big, it's time to do a self-check. The ego and say, where am I today?
Yeah. No, but the power of being, to your point, intentional and self-aware, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's I don't know if it's age too, combined with leadership, but that drive seems to be stronger as we go. The more time you can take to consider for who you are, the better you're going to be at managing all of the change as well. Because being true to who you are, it is very important. You don't want to lose your essence just because things are changing.
Now, what do you think is the role or should be the role of a leader when it comes to driving diversity and inclusion at the workplace?
Oh, I love this question. I had a role once when I was in public sector where I got to lead a lot of these programs. I have a lot of direct experience. And the leader has to model and live it, not just check a box and talk lip service. You have to be inclusive. You have to demonstrate it. You have to put things in place that show you're serious. And it's not just about, okay, I know I have to do this. I spent a lot of time on the downside of that equation in an HR role before, when you don't have a good workplace and you don't have inclusion. It is not, first of all, it's horrible places to work. You can feel it when you come in. They're not productive. People don't have trust, and you end up with a lot of toxic behavior. So it's so important for us. Plus your customer, your members, all those people you're serving, you need to reflect that. You need to understand who you are serving. So in our world, actually, it's really funny. We're going to be putting on a new inclusion program this year. And people tend to kind of veer towards the traditional. Right. Oh, it's women in senior roles. Oh, it's diversity of ethnic groups. No, like we're down to thinking about things like neurodiversity in the workplace. Like there are different ways that people might be on the autism spectrum that they contribute we may not be aware of. What about educational, regional, immigration, all of these factors that now make up society and inclusion? And it's changing. So as a leader, you need to be on top of that. I was at a horrible session recently. I won't name, I don't want to out anybody, but the person delivering it was, I would say, an elite white man, older, talking about women on inclusion, and all the women around the table were the leaders. It was really odd, but this person had been out of date for about 25 years in the topic. So when you're leading, you need to make sure that you're relevant. You need to make sure you're not just that this is part of it, because you'll be quickly outpaced and you'll be replaced. It's just, our world is so complex. Just look at the political landscape that we're dealing with globally. You can't ignore those issues and just say it's somebody else's. You have to be here. So to me, this is probably one of the biggest challenges for leaders in the 21st century is, do you understand what inclusion means? And are you not just, how do you ensure your environment is inclusive and that you're continuing the dialogue and continuing the growth? Because it's never once and done. I think it's an ongoing, I want to call it, it's not even a challenge, it's an ongoing value that we have to have as part of our workplace. So it's not and something we should be embracing with energy. This is exciting. It's great to work in an inclusive environment.
No, that's a great perspective. It can't be dealt as an incremental change with a Band-Aid. You've got to look at it holistically.
Yes.
Now, how do you create the balance in your life with all your responsibilities and family? Like, what do you do to create that?
So you found my Achilles heel, and it is something I'm working on. Actually, it is. A lot of folks that end up in leader positions are probably wired very much. You got a lot of interest in many things you want to get your hands in. I had to take stock and I had to stop doing some things. So I do on a regular basis, at a minimum yearly, usually a couple of times a year, I will almost give myself a little retreat, right? I take a step back and I look at all the things I'm doing now. We started using in our office it's called the 5 choices. It's a Franklin Covey kind of concept. You can use any type of, I like the bullet journal approach myself as well, but whatever organizational tools you like to use. But just looking at how you're balanced is really important, because, and I'll say this, I know for myself, a lot of women like me, we tend to be nurturers and we tend to say yes to everything as well, and you can't. You will spread yourself so thin and you will not be the leader you want to be. So you have to do that and make some tough choices. So you have to say no to some folks. You have to disappoint some people. That's hard. So that's my Achilles heel, and it's my constant work in progress. But that's the first step. Now, what I do is I teach yoga, and so yoga is my real release. I've been doing that for about 8 years now, teaching just for the last one. But that's where I go to put all my non-work and completely sort of let go of all the day-to-day thoughts. Working on mindfulness for me is really important to settle all this energy that I have. So you need to find those things. And for other people, it might be taking up a different hobby and activity. It might just be spending time with family. But you have to find your balance and free up all the other obligations.
Do you teach yoga online by any chance?
I do, actually. I do it, and on Sundays on Facebook, you can find me. I'll send you the link.
Good. That is on my list of things I just haven't gotten to.
Yeah.
Now, any books, leadership books or organizational change books that you're a fan of that you would recommend?
For sure. One of the ones I really love now is, I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek's work. We use It Starts With Why, the Golden Circle concept, but his latest book in particular, I think, is so relevant. And it's really, as I'm sitting here talking about it now, I can't even think of the title, which I'll send to you. But he really is getting into the idea that, we need a bigger purpose in life. Like, we don't go to business just for the sake of making money, that the businesses of the future and where we are. And the way to connect people through change is you got to have a much bigger purpose. So in credit unions, this is exciting. So I'm really into a lot of this his work and the way he thinks about people in an organization. I would say we do a lot with Patrick Leonci. I can't ever say his last name. Anyways, we do a lot of work with, I'd say on the organizational side, we've embraced the 5 Choices book, which is a great balance between what I like about this book in terms of getting yourself and your staff organized is rather than this idea of the work is over here and my life is over here, it doesn't, you treat yourself holistically, and it really challenges people. This is what I've used to start separating my time.
Right.
So I find that one is a really great one.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot, but there's certainly, I think, and that's the key, is find those thought leaders that you have. Now, one last book that I love that we've been embraced in the office, and I got to see the author. It's really called The Culture Code. And The Culture Code is a phenomenal leadership book about, and it's really basic, but what he did is he went and did interviews with hundreds of different types of organizations, everything from multinational companies to even a group of jewel thieves. This is how he went far and wide to find out what's the recipe for effective teams and leadership. And it's three things. It's clarity, like really knowing our clear purpose. It's trust, and it's being vulnerable. And when a team has those things, so that one's a phenomenal book, especially the research is really interesting. But I'd recommend some of those. They're high on our book list right now at Lead Data. So.
Now, if you ever have a chance to sit down and write a book, what would you write about?
Oh, well, see, now you have to, I'm an English major, so I've got about 10 different books that I'd love to write. But I'll say on the nonfiction side, I tend to be more of a nonfiction type writer anyway. You never know. I think one of the things I'll probably write about, and it's interesting, so related to this, is that workplace trauma. I see that, and through my experience, a lot of people have such terrible work experiences that we actually do a lot of harm, and just the effects that toxic workplaces and bad leadership can have. We're seeing it a lot now kind of in there. So I thought that might be something down the road to talk about. And I've seen the flip side where a team can totally be flipped around. A whole company can change immaculately with that change of leadership. And then just my simple ones all about, I have an idea that, like, growing teams is more like growing a garden than it is a factory. So it's all an organic process, and you have to have that kind of patience.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen overnight.
Now, if we put you on the cover of Times Magazine, what would you love it to say?
Who thought? I don't know. To be honest, well, I kind of do think that. I mean, I grew up in a pretty humble means. We started out in public housing, and where I'm at now, what I've learned is that it's not about money. It's truly just people's potential is all about opportunity and how they see themselves in the world. So I don't know. I guess it would just be opportunity in your hawks, something like that. I don't know what it would be, but it's the best I can come up with.
Now, if I asked you to give a quote that would be your legacy as a leader, what would you say that quote is?
This one's a tough one, because I think I think to me, it really kind of, if I were to sum it up, it's sort of like the idea of what I do is who I am. And it sounds really, really crazy, but that's how you are what people perceive, right? So as a leader, I think to me, that's what it is what I do is who I am. It's really that straightforward. And I mean, that can go in a bunch of directions, but people, if you think you're one thing, but your actions are contrary, that's not who you are, and vice versa. So that's sort of where I think I'd stick it that way.
Well, that's a powerful one.